The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble corridors of Ravenspire Palace. But today the golden light seemed dimmed, as if even nature understood the gravity of what was about to unfold. Princess Isabella Charlotte stood at the towering windows of the East Wing, her delicate fingers pressed against the cold glass as she watched the royal guards take their final positions around the palace grounds. Her husband, Prince Alexander Edmund, approached from behind with measured steps that echoed through the vast chamber. His usually confident stride had been replaced by something more hesitant, more human. The weight of the crown he had worn for 7 years seemed heavier today than it had ever been before. "The carriages have arrived," Alexander said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. Isabella could hear the tremor he was trying so desperately to hide. She turned slowly, and, when their eyes met, the reality of their situation hit them both like a physical blow. The kingdom of Astoria was falling. Not to war, not to invasion, but to something far more devastating and irreversible. The ancient curse that had protected their bloodline for centuries was finally claiming its price. Every generation of the royal family had known this day might come, but they had hoped, prayed, and believed that somehow they might be spared. Isabella's emerald dress, the same one she had worn on their wedding day 8 years ago, rustled softly as she moved toward her husband. The fabric had been specially woven with threads of gold and silver, representing the unity of their two kingdoms when they married. Now, those same threads seemed to catch the light in a way that made them appear fragile, ready to unravel. "How long do we have?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. The court wizard, Master Aldrich, had been clear in his final prophecy. The curse would be complete by sunset, and, with it, everything they had built together would crumble into memory. 3 hours, Alexander replied, reaching out to touch her face with a gentleness that spoke of 8 years of deep, abiding love. Maybe 4 if the ancient magic takes longer to fully manifest. Isabella closed her eyes and leaned into his touch. In that moment, she wasn't a princess who had commanded the respect of nobles and commoners alike. She wasn't the woman who had negotiated peace treaties with neighboring kingdoms or who had opened schools and hospitals throughout their realm. She was simply a wife, facing the unthinkable prospect of losing everything she held dear. The sound of footsteps in the corridor announced the arrival of their closest advisors. Lord Chancellor Martin entered first, his usually pristine robes now wrinkled and disheveled. Behind him came Lady Catherine, Isabella's dearest friend and lady-in-waiting, her eyes red from crying. Master Aldrich followed, his ancient face etched with sorrow and guilt for being the bearer of such terrible news. "Your Majesties," Lord Martin began, his voice formal despite the tears in his eyes. "The evacuation of the palace staff has been completed. The people of the capital have been relocated to the neighboring kingdom of Valdris, as you instructed. King Ferdinand has graciously agreed to provide shelter and protection for all our citizens." Isabella nodded, unable to trust her voice. She and Alexander had spent the past week making these arrangements, ensuring that everyone under their protection would be safe when the curse reached its full power. Their people came first, as they always had. Even in their darkest hour, their duty to their subjects remained paramount. "What of the treasury?" Alexander asked, though Isabella knew he cared little for gold and jewels in this moment. It was about ensuring their people would have resources to rebuild their lives elsewhere. "All valuables have been distributed among the refugee families," Master Aldrich replied. "Each household has been given enough to start anew. The remainder has been sent to King Ferdinand to help cover the costs of resettlement." Lady Catherine stepped forward, her hands clutching a small wooden box. "Your Majesty," she said to Isabella, "I've packed your mother's jewelry, the family portraits, and your private letters. Everything else stays here," Isabella finished gently. "This palace, these walls, they're part of the curse now. We cannot take anything that might carry the magic with us." Alexander moved to the great oak desk that had belonged to his father and grandfather before him. Upon it lay the crown of Astoria, a magnificent piece crafted from starlight silver and embedded with gems that had been blessed by ancient druids. Beside it rested Isabella's circlet, smaller but no less significant, adorned with pearls that were said to have been gifts from the sea goddess herself. "I never imagined it would end like this," Alexander said, staring at the crown that had defined his entire adult life. "When I was a boy, I dreamed of being remembered as a great king, of expanding our kingdom, of leaving behind a legacy that would last forever." Isabella joined him at the desk, her hand finding his. You are a great king, Alexander. Look what you've accomplished. Our people are safe. Our kingdom may be lost, but our subjects will survive and thrive because of your leadership. That's a legacy worth more than any crown or castle. Master Aldrich cleared his throat delicately. Your Majesties, I must explain once more about the curse, so you understand fully what will happen. Both Isabella and Alexander turned to face the elderly wizard. His white beard trembled as he spoke, and his usually steady hands shook with emotion. The curse of the Crimson Moon has been dormant in your bloodline for 300 years, Aldrich began. It was placed upon your ancestor, King Roderick the Bold, when he broke a sacred oath to the moon witch of the northern peaks. She decreed that his descendants would rule justly and wisely for exactly 7 generations, but that the 8th generation would lose everything at the moment of their greatest happiness. Isabella felt her breath catch. Their greatest happiness had come just 3 months ago when she discovered she was carrying their first child. The joy that had filled the palace, the celebrations that had lasted for days, the hope and love that had permeated every corner of their kingdom, it had all been the trigger for their doom. The curse cannot be broken, Aldrich continued, his voice heavy with centuries of magical knowledge. But it can be redirected. If you both leave willingly, if you abandon all claims to the throne and renounce your royal blood before the Crimson Moon reaches its peak tonight, the curse will be satisfied. The palace and the capital will fall into eternal slumber, but they will not be destroyed. And you, we will live, Alexander finished. But as commoners, with no memory of our royal heritage. That is correct, Aldrich confirmed. You will remember each other, and your love will remain intact. But everything else, your childhood in these halls, your coronation, your years of rule, even the child you carry, Isabella, all of it will fade from your minds like a half-remembered dream. The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella's hand instinctively moved to her still flat stomach, where new life was growing. To lose the memory of her child, even if the baby survived the magical transformation, seemed like a cruelty beyond comprehension. And if we refuse? Isabella asked, though she knew this question had been answered before. If you remain as rulers when the moon reaches its peak, the curse will consume not just the palace, but you as well. And the magic will spread, eventually claiming the neighboring kingdoms too. Millions would perish. Alexander closed his eyes, the weight of an impossible choice crushing down upon him. Save themselves, but lose their memories, their identities, everything that made them who they were. Or die with their memories intact, but condemn innocent people to the same fate. Lady Catherine stepped closer to Isabella. My lady, perhaps there's another way. Perhaps if you left now, immediately, the curse might. No, Master Aldrich interrupted sadly. The magic has already begun. Look at the walls. Everyone turned to observe the stone walls of the chamber. There, barely visible, were thin lines of silver light beginning to trace ancient symbols across the surface. The curse was manifesting, marking the palace for its eternal sleep. We have perhaps 2 hours before the renunciation ceremony must begin, Aldrich explained. After that, the choice will be made for you. Isabella turned back to the window, watching as the last of the carriages disappeared beyond the palace gates. Their people were safe, traveling toward new lives in foreign lands. The thought brought her some comfort, even as her heart broke for all that was about to be lost. Alexander, she said quietly, not turning from the window. Do you remember our first dance? He moved to stand beside her, his reflection joining hers in the glass. At the Midsummer Festival, when we were children, you were visiting from Celestia with your parents. You wore a blue dress with tiny silver stars embroidered on the skirt. You stepped on my feet 3 times. Isabella smiled through her tears. But you were so earnest about it, so determined to get it right. Even then, I knew you would be a good king. You never gave up, no matter how many times you stumbled. I fell in love with you that night, Alexander admitted. A 12-year-old boy falling in love with a 10-year-old princess. My father said I was being ridiculous, that childhood infatuations were meaningless. But I knew, even then, that you were going to be the most important person in my life. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the shadows grow longer across the courtyard. Soon, those shadows would be permanent, frozen in time along with everything else within the palace walls. The baby, Isabella whispered, her voice breaking. How can we forget our child? Alexander's arm tightened around her waist. We won't forget, he said firmly. Somewhere, in some part of our hearts, we'll know. Love that's strong doesn't just disappear, even from memory. We'll feel it, even if we can't name it. Lord Martin approached them hesitantly. Your Majesties, the renunciation ceremony requires certain preparations. We should begin soon. Isabella nodded, though every fiber of her being rebelled against what they were about to do. She looked around the chamber one last time, memorizing every detail. The tapestries that told the story of their kingdom's founding. The portrait of Alexander's parents above the fireplace. The small table where they had shared countless private dinners, planning for a future that would never come. I want to walk through the palace, she said suddenly. One last time. I want to say goodbye to every room, every memory. Alexander understood immediately. Together? Together. They left the advisors in the main chamber and began their final journey through the home they had shared for 8 years of marriage. Their footsteps echoed through empty corridors that had once bustled with activity. Servants, guards, courtiers, diplomats, all gone now, leaving behind only the ghosts of laughter and conversation. Their first stop was the throne room, where they had held court every morning, listening to the concerns of their people and dispensing justice with wisdom and compassion. The 2 thrones sat empty now, carved from ancient oak and cushioned with velvet that had been blessed by priests of 7 different faiths. Alexander had insisted that Isabella's throne be the same size as his, a radical departure from tradition that had initially shocked the court, but ultimately came to symbolize their equal partnership in ruling. Do you remember the day we decided to open the royal gardens to the public? Isabella asked, running her fingers along the arm of her throne. Lord Martin was horrified. Alexander laughed softly. He said it was unprecedented, that royalty should maintain distance from common folk. But you insisted that beauty belonged to everyone. And it was the right decision, Isabella said firmly. Some of my happiest memories are of watching children play among the roses while their parents picnicked on the grass. That's what a kingdom should be, a place where everyone can find joy. They continued through the palace, each room holding its own treasures of memory. The library where they had spent countless evenings reading to each other. The music room where Isabella played piano while Alexander sang in his surprisingly melodious voice. The conservatory where they had grown herbs for the palace kitchen and flowers for the royal chambers. Finally, they reached their private quarters. The bedroom they had shared as newlyweds, where they had talked through the night about their dreams for the kingdom and their hopes for the future. The sitting room where they had planned state dinners and intimate gatherings with equal care. The balcony where they watched the sunrise each morning before beginning their royal duties. Isabella sat on the edge of their bed, her hands smoothing the silk coverlet they had brought back from their honeymoon journey to the Southern Isles. Alexander sat beside her, and, for a moment, they were simply a husband and wife facing an impossible situation. If we do this, Isabella said slowly, if we give up everything, what kind of life will we have? Alexander took her hands in his. I don't know, he admitted. Master Aldrich says we'll be drawn to each other, that we'll fall in love again even without our memories. But we won't be royal. We might be farmers, or merchants, or craftspeople. We might struggle to make ends meet. Will that be enough? Isabella asked. Will love be enough without everything else we've shared? Alexander was quiet for a long moment, considering her question with the same careful thought he had always given to matters of state. Do you remember what you said to me on our wedding day? After all the ceremony and pageantry, when we were finally alone? Isabella smiled through her tears. I said that the crown might make you a king, but it was your heart that made me want to be your queen. Your heart, Isabella. Not your title, not your royal blood, not this palace or these responsibilities. Your heart. That's what I fell in love with, and that's what I'll fall in love with again in whatever life awaits us. A soft knock at the door interrupted their moment. Master Aldrich entered, his expression grave. Your Majesties, it is time. The crimson moon is beginning to rise, and the ceremony must begin before it reaches its peak. Isabella stood slowly, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach once more. Will the baby be safe? The child will be born healthy and strong, Aldrich assured her. Magic protects innocence, especially those who carry royal blood. Your son or daughter will grow up in whatever life you build together, never knowing they might have been a prince or princess. Son or daughter? Isabella closed her eyes, trying to imagine holding a child she would love completely, but never know had once been destined for a throne. Alexander rose and offered her his arm, the same formal gesture he had made on their wedding day. Shall we, my love? Isabella took his arm, feeling the strength and steadiness that had always been his greatest qualities. "Together," she whispered. "Always together." As they walked toward the great hall where the renunciation ceremony would take place, Isabella felt a strange sense of peace beginning to settle over her heart. They were losing everything they had ever known, everything they had worked to build. But they were not losing each other. In a world where so many people live their entire lives without ever finding true love, perhaps that was miracle enough. The great hall had been prepared according to ancient ritual. Candles flickered in the growing darkness, casting dancing shadows on the walls. A circle of salt had been drawn in the center of the floor, with symbols of renunciation carved into the stone itself. Master Aldrich stood ready with the ceremonial texts, while Lord Martin and Lady Catherine waited to witness the end of a dynasty. Isabella paused at the threshold, taking one final look at the life they were about to abandon. Tomorrow, this hall would be silent forever, suspended in magical sleep until the end of time. But tonight, it would witness the greatest act of love and sacrifice in the kingdom's history. "Ready?" Alexander asked softly. Isabella squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his presence. "Ready." Together, they stepped into the circle, toward their uncertain future and away from their certain past, carrying nothing but their love for each other and the hope that, somehow, it would be enough. The salt circle seemed to pulse with ancient energy as Isabella and Alexander stepped within its boundaries. The moment their feet crossed the line, the temperature in the great hall dropped noticeably, and the candle flames flickered as if responding to invisible winds. Master Aldrich's weathered face was etched with sorrow as he opened the tome that contained the renunciation ritual, its pages yellowed with age and written in the old tongue that few still understood. "Before we begin," Aldrich said solemnly, "you must understand that once the words are spoken, there can be no return. The magic will begin its work immediately, and by dawn, you will be different people living different lives. Are you certain this is your choice?" Isabella felt Alexander's hand tighten around hers. She looked into his eyes, those warm brown eyes that had been her anchor through 7 years of ruling a kingdom, and saw her own determination reflected there. "We are certain," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Then, we shall begin." Aldrich raised his hands, and the symbols carved into the floor began to glow with a soft silver light. "By the ancient laws that bind crown to blood, and blood to magic, by the oaths sworn by your ancestors, and the promises made to your people, we gather to witness the willing surrender of all claims to throne and title." The formal words echoed through the vast hall, but Isabella found her mind wandering to smaller, more personal memories. The way Alexander always brought her morning tea exactly as she liked it, with honey from their own royal beehives. The sound of his laughter when she told him amusing stories from her meetings with the kingdom's nobility. The feeling of absolute safety she experienced whenever he held her during thunderstorms. "Isabella Charlotte, Princess of Astoria, daughter of the House of Celestia, do you renounce all claims to royal blood and privilege?" Isabella's voice caught slightly as she responded. "I do solemnly renounce all claims to royal blood and privilege. I cast aside the title that was my birthright and the crown that was my destiny. I choose love over legacy, life over legend." As soon as she spoke the words, a warm, tingling sensation began in her fingertips and slowly spread up her arms. It wasn't unpleasant, but it was definitely magical in nature. She could feel something fundamental shifting within her, though she couldn't yet identify what it was. "Alexander Edmund, King of Astoria, heir to the throne of his fathers, do you renounce all claims to royal blood and privilege?" Alexander's voice was steady, though Isabella could see the tears glistening in his eyes. "I do solemnly renounce all claims to royal blood and privilege. I cast aside the crown that was my birthright and the kingdom that was my responsibility. I choose love over duty, companionship over command." The moment he finished speaking, the silver glow from the floor intensified dramatically. Isabella gasped as the tingling sensation in her body increased, and she began to feel a strange lightness, as if parts of her very essence were gently floating away. "The first binding is complete," Master Aldrich announced. "Now begins the transformation. You will retain your love for each other, your core personalities, and your essential goodness. But your memories of royal life, your knowledge of statecraft, your awareness of your noble heritage, these will fade like morning mist." Lady Catherine stepped forward with tears streaming down her face. "Your Majesty," she said to Isabella, "I have served your family since I was a girl. Is there any message you would like me to preserve? Any final words for history? Isabella considered the question carefully. What did she want to be remembered for? The trade agreements she had negotiated? The school she had founded? The diplomacy that had prevented wars? Tell them, she said finally, that we tried to rule with kindness. Tell them that we believed ordinary people deserved extraordinary care. And tell them that when faced with the choice between saving ourselves and saving our people, we chose our people without hesitation. Alexander nodded in agreement. And tell them that the greatest honor of my life wasn't wearing a crown. It was loving a woman who made me want to be worthy of ruling beside her. Master Aldrich opened the tome to a different page, where symbols seemed to writhe and move in the candlelight. The second phase requires you to speak the names you will bear in your new life. The magic will choose forms that reflect your true selves, stripped of royal influence. The elderly wizard began to chant in the ancient tongue, his voice rising and falling in complex patterns that seemed to resonate with the very stones of the palace. As he spoke, images began to form in the air above the salt circle, shadowy figures that gradually became clearer. Isabella saw a young woman with her own face, but wearing simple peasant clothing, her hands stained with what appeared to be flour. She was smiling as she kneaded bread, and there was a contentment in her expression that Isabella recognized as genuine happiness. Beside the woman stood a man who was clearly Alexander, but he wore the leather apron of a craftsman, and his hands showed the calluses of honest work. You will be Elena and Adrian, Master Aldrich revealed as the visions became clearer. She will be a baker, known throughout her village for the sweetness of her pastries and the generosity of her heart. You will be a woodworker, whose furniture is prized for its beauty and durability. You will meet at the market in the town of Millhaven, 3 days' journey from here, and you will fall in love as if for the first time. Isabella, Elena, felt a strange peace settle over her at this revelation. The life she saw in the magical vision wasn't grand or important in the way her royal existence had been, but it was filled with simple joys and honest work. There would be no crown, but there would also be no burdens of state, no impossible decisions that affected thousands of lives. What of our child? She asked, her hand moving instinctively to her stomach. The child will be born healthy and loved, Aldrich assured her. In your new life, you will be blessed with fertility early in your marriage. Your daughter will grow up believing herself the child of a baker and a woodworker, and she will be happy in that belief. Daughter. Isabella felt a surge of emotion at learning the gender of the child she carried. A little girl who would grow up free from the constraints and expectations of royalty, free to choose her own path in life. The magical transformation was accelerating now. Isabella could feel memories beginning to fade around the edges, like old paintings losing their color. She struggled to hold on to the most important moments, their wedding day, their coronation, the first time Alexander had told her he loved her, but they were slipping away despite her efforts. It's happening, she whispered to Alexander, panic rising in her chest. I can feel myself forgetting. Alexander pulled her closer, and she could see the same fear in his eyes. Remember what's important, he said urgently. Remember that we love each other. Remember that we're good people who try to do right. Remember that whatever comes next, we face it together. Lord Martin stepped forward with a velvet cushion bearing their crowns. Your Majesties, the final step requires you to formally pass these symbols of authority to the magic itself. They will remain here, in the palace, until the curse is broken. Isabella looked at her circlet, remembering the day it had first been placed on her head. She had been so young, so terrified of the responsibility it represented. Now she was terrified of giving it up, but for entirely different reasons. The crown had become part of her identity, and without it, who would she be? You'll be yourself, Alexander said softly, apparently reading her thoughts. The woman I fell in love with existed before you ever wore a crown, and she'll exist after you take it off. Together, they reached for their crowns. The metal felt warm to the touch, as if it had absorbed years of their hopes and dreams and fears. Isabella lifted her circlet from her head slowly, feeling the weight of it one last time. The pearls caught the candlelight and seemed to glow with their own inner fire. Alexander removed his crown with similar reverence, his movements careful and deliberate. The starlight silver reflected the magical illumination throughout the hall, creating patterns of light that danced across the walls like living art. We place these symbols of our authority into the keeping of the ancient magic, Isabella said, following the ritual words that somehow came to her naturally. May they remain here as testament to our willing sacrifice, until such time as the curse is lifted and our kingdom can know rulers again. They placed the crowns together in the center of the salt circle. The moment the metal touched the stone floor, a brilliant flash of silver light filled the entire hall. When Isabella's vision cleared, she saw that the crowns had been encased in what appeared to be crystal, perfect, and unbreakable. "It is done," Master Aldrich said, his voice heavy with finality. "The renunciation is complete. The curse accepts your sacrifice and will spare the surrounding lands. You have perhaps an hour before the final transformation takes hold, and your memories of this life fade completely." Isabella felt oddly calm now that the irreversible step had been taken. The panic and fear were fading, replaced by a sense of completion, of a chapter ending so that a new one could begin. She looked around the great hall, trying to memorize every detail before it slipped away from her forever. "There's something I want to do," she said suddenly. "Something I need to do before we lose ourselves entirely." She led Alexander out of the great hall and through the corridors toward the palace gardens. Their footsteps echoed strangely now, as if the very walls were beginning to forget their presence. The magical transformation was affecting the palace itself, preparing it for its eternal slumber. The royal gardens were magnificent in the moonlight, carefully tended beds of roses and lavender creating patterns that could be seen from the palace windows. Isabella had spent countless hours here, finding peace among the flowers when the pressures of ruling became overwhelming. It was here that Alexander had first kissed her after their betrothal, here that they had walked hand in hand planning their future together. "I want to plant something," Isabella said, moving toward the gardening shed where tools and seeds were kept. "Something that will grow and bloom long after we're gone. Something to mark that we were here, that we loved each other, that our time as rulers mattered." Alexander understood immediately. Together, they selected a young rosebush, its roots still held in burlap from the palace nursery. The variety was called True Love, with deep red blooms that were said to represent eternal devotion. Isabella had always thought the name was rather silly, but now it seemed perfect. They chose a spot near the center of the garden, visible from the throne room windows, and began to dig. The physical work felt good after the emotional intensity of the renunciation ceremony. Isabella's fine dress was soon stained with earth, but she didn't care. This felt more real, more meaningful than any royal ceremony she had ever participated in. "When it blooms," Alexander said as they settled the rosebush into its new home, "whoever sees it will know that love lived here. They might not know our names or our story, but they'll know that someone loved deeply enough to create something beautiful." As they worked together to water and mulch the newly planted rose, Isabella felt another wave of the transformation washing over her. More memories were fading, state dinners became hazy, diplomatic meetings turned to shadows. Entire years of her life as princess began to blur together. But the feeling of working beside Alexander in the garden remained crystal clear, as did her love for him. "I'm starting to forget," she said, sitting back on her heels and looking up at the crimson moon that was now approaching its zenith. "But I'm not afraid anymore. Are you?" Alexander's hands were dirty from their gardening, his formal clothes rumpled and stained, his carefully groomed appearance completely disheveled. But his smile was the same one that had captured her heart as a child, and his eyes held the same kindness that had made her certain she could trust him with her life. "No," he said simply. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. That's all I need to know." They made their way back toward the palace, leaving the rosebush to take root in the soil that had nurtured royal gardens for centuries. Along the way, they encountered Lady Catherine and Lord Martin, who had been waiting to say their final goodbyes. "My lady," Catherine said, embracing Isabella with the familiarity of a lifelong friendship, "I want you to know that serving you has been the greatest honor of my life. You've been more than a queen to me. You've been a sister, a friend, and an inspiration." Isabella hugged her back, though she was beginning to struggle to remember exactly why this woman seemed so important to her. The emotional connection remained strong, but the specific memories were becoming increasingly vague. "Thank you," Isabella said, though she wasn't entirely sure what she was thanking Catherine for. You've been very good to me. I know that much, even if I can't remember all the details." Lord Martin bowed formally to both of them. "Your Majesties, it has been my privilege to serve the crown during your reign. You have ruled with wisdom and compassion, and Your people will remember your kindness long after the details of your reign fade from history. Alexander shook the man's hand warmly. Take care of yourself, Martin. And take care of whatever needs taking care of. I feel like there are important things I should be telling you, but I can't quite remember what they are. The older man's eyes filled with tears. Don't worry about it, Your Majesty. Everything that needs to be done has been done. You've left everything in perfect order. As they continued toward the palace entrance, Isabella realized that she was no longer certain why they were leaving or where they were going. The urgency of their situation remained, but the specific details were becoming fuzzy. She knew that something important was happening, something that required them to go away from this beautiful place, but she couldn't quite remember what. Alexander, she said, stopping in the courtyard. I'm confused. Why are we leaving? This place feels like home, but I can't remember exactly why. Alexander looked around at the towering walls and elegant architecture with an expression of puzzlement that matched her own. I'm not sure either, he admitted. But I know we need to go. And I know that wherever we're going together. Master Aldrich appeared beside them, though Isabella couldn't remember seeing him approach. The elderly man seemed familiar, like someone she should know well, but his name escaped her. It's time, he said gently. Your carriage is waiting at the gates. The transformation is nearly complete. You have perhaps 10 more minutes before you become Elena and Adrian permanently. Elena. That name felt right somehow, more right than Isabella had felt for. Well, she couldn't remember how long. And Adrian. Yes, that was the name of the man beside her, the man she loved more than life itself, though she couldn't quite recall how they had met or when they had fallen in love. Will someone explain to us what's happening? Elena asked, feeling no embarrassment at her confusion. I feel like I should remember, but everything is so hazy. You're beginning new lives together, the elderly man explained patiently. You're traveling to the town of Millhaven, where you'll be married and build a life together. Elena, you're a baker. Adrian, you're a woodworker. You met at the market and fell in love at first sight. That felt true. Elena looked at Adrian and felt a rush of affection so strong it made her dizzy. Of course she had fallen in love with him at first sight. How could anyone not love that kind face, those gentle hands, that smile that made her feel like the most precious person in the world? Are we married already? She asked, noticing matching rings on their fingers. You will be, the man said kindly. Very soon. Your wedding is planned for next week, and the whole town is excited to celebrate with you. Elena felt a thrill of excitement at the thought of marrying Adrian. She couldn't wait to be his wife, to build a life with him, to wake up beside him every morning and know that they belonged to each other completely. A simple wooden carriage waited for them at the palace gates, loaded with what appeared to be their possessions, tools for woodworking, supplies for baking, simple but well-made clothing, and a small chest that presumably held their savings. The driver, a pleasant-faced man with a kind smile, helped them into the carriage. Ready to go home? The driver asked cheerfully. Yes, Elena said without hesitation. We're ready. As the carriage pulled away from the palace gates, Elena looked back at the imposing structure one last time. It was beautiful, certainly, but it felt like a place from a dream, magnificent but somehow unreal. She couldn't imagine why she had ever thought of it as home. It's like a fairy tale castle, she said to Adrian, settling comfortably against his side as the carriage rolled through the countryside. Perfect for a fairy tale princess, Adrian replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Elena laughed. Me, a princess? Can you imagine? I wouldn't know the first thing about being royal. I'm much better suited to baking bread than ruling kingdoms. As they traveled through the night toward their new life in Millhaven, neither Elena nor Adrian noticed the silver light that began to emanate from the palace behind them. They didn't see the walls and towers gradually becoming translucent, like crystal or ice. They didn't witness the moment when the entire structure shifted into a state between sleeping and waking, preserved forever by ancient magic. In the royal gardens, a newly planted rosebush began to glow with the same silver light. But, unlike the palace, it remained fully real and alive. As dawn broke over the kingdom of Astoria, the first true love rose bloomed, its deep red petals unfurling to greet the morning sun, a living testament to a love strong enough to sacrifice everything. The palace fell silent, but love endured. 3 months later, the town of Millhaven buzzed with excited preparation as Elena and Adrian's wedding day dawned bright and clear. The small community had embraced the young couple from the moment they arrived, drawn to Elena's warm smile and generous spirit, and Adrian's skilled hands and gentle nature. Their love story had become the talk of the town, how they had met in the marketplace, how Adrian had been so tongue-tied at Elena's beauty that he'd knocked over an entire display of apples, how Elena had laughed and helped him gather them up, and how they'd talked until sunset that very first day. Elena stood before the cracked mirror in her tiny rented room above the baker's shop where she worked, adjusting the simple white dress that Mrs. Henderson, the seamstress, had made for her wedding. The fabric was cotton rather than silk, and there were no jewels or elaborate embroidery, but Elena thought she had never seen anything more beautiful. The dress was modest and practical, perfect for a baker's wife who would need to work hard to help build their life together. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," Elena called, expecting to see Martha, her closest friend in Millhaven, who had promised to help with her hair. Instead, a stranger entered, an elderly woman with silver hair and eyes that seemed to hold depths of knowledge and sadness. Elena had never seen her before, yet something about her seemed familiar, like a half-remembered dream. "Hello, Elena," the woman said gently. "My name is Sarah. I knew your parents long ago, before they died. I've traveled a long way to see you married." Elena felt a pang of the old sadness that always came when her missing past was mentioned. She and Adrian both suffered from the same strange condition. Neither could remember their childhood or families. The local doctor had suggested they might have been in an accident that affected their memories, and the townsfolk had accepted this explanation kindly, never pressing for details they couldn't provide. "You knew my parents?" Elena asked, her heart racing with hope. Any information about her past was precious, as she had no memories from before arriving in Millhaven. Sarah nodded, her expression gentle but careful. "They were good people, dear ones. They loved each other very much, just as you and Adrian do. Your mother especially would have been so proud to see you today, so happy in love, and ready to start your family." Elena's hand moved instinctively to her stomach, where new life was growing. She had discovered her pregnancy just a week ago, and the joy of it had made her wedding day feel even more special. She and Adrian would be parents by next spring, and Elena could hardly wait to hold their child. "What were they like?" Elena asked, settling onto the small wooden chair by the window. "I wish I could remember them." Sarah sat on the bed, her movements graceful despite her apparent age. "Your mother was kind and generous, always thinking of others before herself. She had a gift for making people feel special, important. Your father was strong and protective, the sort of man who would do anything to keep his family safe. They ruled their household with wisdom and love." Something about the word ruled struck Elena as odd, but she couldn't place why. "Were they wealthy?" "In all the ways that mattered," Sarah replied diplomatically. "They had each other, and they had you, and they considered themselves the richest people in the world." Elena smiled at this, feeling a warmth in her chest that might have been memory or might simply have been the comfort of knowing she had been loved. "I wish they could be here today." "Oh, my dear," Sarah said softly, "they are here. Love like theirs doesn't die. It lives on in you, in the choices you make, in the way you care for others. Every kindness you show, every moment of joy you create, that's your parents living on through you." Another knock at the door announced Martha's arrival, and Elena's friend bustled in with an armload of wildflowers for Elena's wedding bouquet. Martha stopped short when she saw Sarah, her expression curious but welcoming. "Martha, this is Sarah," Elena explained. "She knew my parents." Martha's face lit up with delight. "Oh, how wonderful. Elena, you must be so pleased to have family here for your wedding." Sarah's smile was gentle but tinged with sadness. "I'm honored to represent those who cannot be here themselves." As Martha worked on Elena's hair, weaving small flowers through the simple braids she fashioned, Sarah told careful stories about Elena's parents. She spoke of their devotion to each other, their dedication to caring for those around them, and their belief that the greatest wealth was a life filled with love and purpose. "Your mother had a beautiful singing voice," Sarah mentioned as Martha put the finishing touches on Elena's hair. "She used to sing while she worked, and everyone who heard her felt happier for it." "I love to sing," Elena said in surprise. "When I'm kneading bread or cleaning the shop, I always find myself humming. I never knew where it came from." "Some gifts run in families," Sarah said knowingly. "Even when we can't remember learning them, they stay with us." Martha stepped back to admire her handiwork. "There, Elena, you look absolutely radiant. Adrian won't be able to speak when he sees you." Elena laughed, remembering how Adrian still became adorably tongue-tied whenever she dressed up. even for simple occasions like the town harvest festival. He'll probably forget his vows entirely. Love has a way of making the important words come naturally, Sarah said. When the moment arrives, both of you will know exactly what to say. As the church bells began to ring, announcing that the ceremony would begin soon, Elena felt a flutter of nervous excitement in her stomach. She had dreamed of this day since she and Adrian had gotten engaged 2 months ago, but now that it was actually here, the magnitude of what they were promising each other felt overwhelming. What if I'm not good enough for him? Elena asked suddenly, the words spilling out before she could stop them. What if I can't be the wife he deserves? Sarah took Elena's hands in hers, and Elena noticed that the older woman's fingers bore the faint marks of old ring indentations, as if she had once worn jewelry that was no longer there. Listen to me, child, Sarah said firmly. You are exactly the woman he needs, just as he is exactly the man you need. Love isn't about being perfect, it's about being willing to grow together, to forgive each other's mistakes, to choose each other again and again, even when times are difficult. Martha nodded in agreement. Elena, everyone in this town can see how much you two love each other. The way he looks at you when you're not watching, the way you light up whenever he enters a room, that's not something you have to work at. That's just who you are together. Elena took a deep breath, feeling her nervousness transform into excited anticipation. You're right. We love each other. Everything else, we'll figure out together. Sarah stood and moved to the window, looking down at the small church where townspeople were already beginning to gather for the ceremony. Elena, there's something I want to give you before you go. Something that belonged to your mother. She reached into her cloak and withdrew a small wooden box, worn smooth by years of handling. Inside, nestled in faded silk, was a simple pendant on a thin chain. The pendant itself was unremarkable, just a small piece of polished silver shaped like a rose, but something about it made Elena's heart race. She wore this on her wedding day, Sarah explained, lifting the necklace carefully. And on every important day after that. She would have wanted you to have it. As Sarah fastened the chain around Elena's neck, Elena felt a strange sense of completion, as if a missing piece of herself had been restored. The pendant felt familiar against her skin, though she was certain she had never seen it before. It's beautiful, Elena breathed, touching the small silver rose. Thank you for bringing it to me. There's one more thing, Sarah said, producing a small leather journal from her cloak. Your mother kept this. It's full of advice about marriage, recipes for happiness, thoughts about love and family. She started it when she was first married, hoping to pass it on to you someday. Elena accepted the journal with trembling hands, overwhelmed by this tangible connection to the mother she couldn't remember. The leather cover was soft with age, and when she opened it, she saw page after page of elegant handwriting in faded ink. The secret to a happy marriage, Elena read aloud from the first page, is remembering that you're on the same side, even when you disagree. Love isn't just a feeling. It's a choice you make every day to put your partner's happiness alongside your own. Tears pricked Elena's eyes as she realized she was reading her mother's words, her mother's wisdom about the very commitment she was about to make. This is the most precious gift anyone has ever given me. Your mother was a wise woman, Sarah said softly. She understood that love is both the easiest and the hardest thing in the world. Easy because when you truly love someone, caring for them feels as natural as breathing. Hard because life will test that love in ways you can't imagine, and you have to choose to keep loving even when it would be easier to give up. The church bells chimed again, more insistently this time, and Martha gathered up Elena's simple bouquet of wildflowers. It's time, she announced with excitement. Are you ready? Elena looked at herself one final time in the mirror, seeing a young woman in love, ready to commit her life to the man who had captured her heart. The silver rose pendant caught the light, and, for just a moment, Elena thought she saw something else in her reflection, a regal bearing, a confident grace that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than memory. I'm ready, she said firmly. The walk to the church was short, just down the main street of Millhaven past the shops and houses that had become so familiar over the past 3 months. Neighbors called out good wishes from their doorways. Children threw flower petals in her path, and Mrs. Henderson wiped tears from her eyes as she watched Elena pass by. At the church steps, Elena paused to look back at Sarah, who had been walking a respectful distance behind. The elderly woman nodded encouragingly, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Will I see you after the ceremony? Elena asked. Will you stay for the celebration? Sarah's smile was gentle but sad. I'm afraid I must leave soon after the ceremony ends. But Know that you carry the love and blessings of everyone who ever cared for you, whether you remember them or not. Elena felt a pang of loss at the thought of Sarah leaving so soon after finding her, but Martha was gently urging her forward, and through the open church doors, she could see Adrian waiting at the altar. Her breath caught at the sight of him. He wore his best clothes, a simple but well-cut jacket that emphasized his broad shoulders, and trousers he had carefully pressed for the occasion. His dark hair was neatly combed, though she could see he had been running his hands through it nervously. But it was his expression that made her heart soar, the look of absolute wonder and joy on his face as he watched her walk down the aisle. The church was packed with what seemed like the entire population of Millhaven. Old Mr. Peterson from the general store sat next to young Tommy Fletcher, who worked at the mill. Mrs. Davies, who had taught Elena some of her best baking techniques, dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. The blacksmith, the innkeeper, the farmers, and their families, all of them had come to witness Elena and Adrian's union. But Elena only had eyes for Adrian as she walked down the aisle. With each step, she felt more certain that this was exactly where she belonged, exactly what she was meant to do. Whatever had come before in her forgotten past, whatever sorrows or losses she couldn't remember, they had all led her to this moment, to this man, to this life they were about to build together. When she reached the altar, Adrian took her hands in his, and she could feel the slight tremor in his fingers that told her he was as moved as she was. "You look beautiful," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "You look handsome," she whispered back, and they both smiled, some of the nervous tension releasing. Pastor Williams, a kindly man who had welcomed them both warmly into the community, cleared his throat to begin the ceremony. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Elena and Adrian in holy matrimony. Marriage is a sacred bond, not to be entered into lightly, but with great thought and consideration for the commitment being made." As the pastor spoke about love, commitment, and the sacred nature of marriage, Elena found her mind drifting to the journal Sarah had given her, to her mother's words about choosing love every day. She thought about the silver rose pendant resting against her heart, connecting her to a family she couldn't remember, but whose love she could feel. "Adrian," Pastor Williams said, "do you take Elena to be your lawfully wedded wife? Do you promise to love her, honor her, cherish her, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, for as long as you both shall live?" Adrian's voice was strong and clear. "I do. I promise to love Elena with all my heart, to support her dreams, to stand by her side through whatever life brings us. I promise to choose her every day, to build a life with her filled with laughter and joy and the kind of love that makes everything else worthwhile." Elena felt tears sliding down her cheeks at the sincerity in his voice, at the love shining in his eyes. "Elena," Pastor Williams continued, "do you take Adrian to be your lawfully wedded husband? Do you promise to love him, honor him, cherish him, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, for as long as you both shall live?" Elena looked into Adrian's eyes and felt the absolute certainty of her response. "I do. I promise to love Adrian with everything I am, to encourage his dreams, to face whatever challenges come our way together. I promise to choose joy, to choose kindness, to choose love, every single day for the rest of our lives." As they exchanged simple gold rings that Adrian had crafted himself in his workshop, Elena felt a profound sense of completion. Whatever she had lost in her forgotten past, she was gaining something infinitely precious in this moment, a true partner, a loving companion, a future filled with possibility. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Pastor Williams announced with a broad smile. "Adrian, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was gentle and sweet, full of promise and joy, and the church erupted in cheers and applause. As they turned to face their friends and neighbors as husband and wife, Elena caught sight of Sarah standing in the back of the church. The elderly woman was crying openly, her face radiant with happiness, and she pressed her hand to her heart in a gesture that somehow seemed significant. But before Elena could puzzle over it further, she was swept up in a tide of congratulations and well wishes. The entire town seemed determined to celebrate with them, and Elena found herself laughing and crying and accepting endless hugs from people who had become her chosen family. As they walked out of the church together, Adrian's arm around her waist and her hand resting on his chest, Elena felt a contentment so deep it seemed to reach her very soul. She was Elena Fletcher now, a baker's wife in a small town, expecting her first child and surrounded by people who cared about her. It was a simple life, but it was hers, and it was perfect. The celebration that followed was everything Elena had dreamed it would be. Tables laden with food prepared by the generous women of Millhaven, music and dancing in the town square, laughter and joy that lasted well into the evening. But the moment that would stay with Elena forever was when she and Adrian stole away for a quiet moment alone, standing together under the stars behind the church. "Are you happy?" Adrian asked softly, his arms wrapped around her from behind as they looked up at the night sky. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Elena replied honestly. "I feel like my real life is just beginning." "Mine too," Adrian agreed, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. "I love you, Mrs. Fletcher." "I love you too, Mr. Fletcher." They stood together in comfortable silence, two people who had found each other against all odds, ready to build a life filled with love, hard work, and simple joys. In the distance, if either of them had looked, they might have seen a faint silver glow on the horizon where an ancient palace stood in magical slumber. But they were too focused on each other and their bright future to notice the past they had left behind. Their love story was just beginning. 5 years had passed since Elena and Adrian Fletcher's wedding, and their small cottage on Elm Street had become a haven of warmth and happiness. The modest two-story home, built by Adrian's own hands with help from the men of Millhaven, echoed daily with the sounds of family life. Elena's singing as she worked in her expanded bakery kitchen, Adrian's patient voice teaching their 4-year-old daughter Rose to carve simple shapes from wood, and the delighted squeals of their 2-year-old son Thomas as he chased the family cat through the garden. Elena stood at her kitchen window, kneading dough for the day's bread orders while watching her children play in the garden that Adrian had so lovingly cultivated. Rose, with her mother's dark hair and her father's gentle brown eyes, was carefully tending to the flowers she had planted in her own small plot. Thomas, still chubby with toddler softness and blessed with Adrian's kind nature, was attempting to help by pulling weeds that were actually flowers. The kitchen around Elena bore little resemblance to the cramped space above the baker's shop where she had started 5 years ago. Adrian's skilled craftsmanship was evident in every corner. Custom shelves to hold her growing collection of mixing bowls and baking implements, a large wooden table perfect for rolling out pastry, and ingenious storage solutions that made the most of every inch. The success of Elena's bakery had allowed them to build their dream home, complete with the large kitchen she had always wanted and Adrian's workshop, where he created furniture prized throughout the region. "Mama, Thomas is eating dirt again," Rose called from the garden, her voice carrying the exasperated tone of an older sister who took her responsibilities seriously. Elena laughed, wiping her flour-covered hands on her apron before stepping outside. "Thomas Fletcher, what have I told you about eating dirt?" Her son looked up at her with his father's innocent expression, his face streaked with soil and his mouth decidedly gritty. "Scood, Mama," he declared, attempting to grab another handful. "No, sweetheart, dirt is for the plants, not for little boys," Elena said gently, scooping him up despite his protests. "Let's get you cleaned up before Papa comes home for lunch." As she carried Thomas inside for a wash, Elena reflected on how perfectly her life had unfolded. The bakery was thriving. Her breads, pastries, and special occasion cakes were famous throughout the region, and she often had orders from neighboring towns. Adrian's furniture business was equally successful, his pieces sought after for their beauty and durability. They had built a comfortable life together, surrounded by friends who had become family and blessed with 2 healthy, happy children. Yet sometimes, in quiet moments like this, Elena felt a strange sense of something missing, though she could never identify what it might be. It wasn't unhappiness. She was genuinely content with her life. It was more like the feeling of having misplaced something important, but being unable to remember what it was. The feeling had grown stronger recently, particularly when she looked at the silver rose pendant she still wore every day, the last gift from her mysterious past. Adrian arrived home for lunch right on schedule, as he always did, his work clothes dusty from the morning spent crafting a dining set for the banker's family. The smile that lit up his face when he saw Elena never failed to make her heart flutter, even after 5 years of marriage. "How are my favorite people today?" he asked, kissing Elena soundly before scooping Rose up for a hug and ruffling Thomas's newly clean hair. "Papa, I planted marigolds," Rose announced proudly. "Elena says they'll keep the bad bugs away from her vegetables." Adrian had started calling Elena by her given name when speaking to the children, wanting them to understand that Mama had her own identity beyond just being their mother. It was one of the many small ways he showed his respect for her as an individual, something that still surprised Elena sometimes with its thoughtfulness. "That's very helpful of you, Rose," Adrian said seriously. "A good garden needs someone who understands how all the plants work together." As they sat down to lunch, fresh bread with butter Elena had churned herself, soup made from vegetables from their own garden, and milk from Mrs. Patterson's cow, Elena noticed that Adrian seemed more contemplative than usual. "What's on your mind?" she asked, knowing him well enough to read the slight furrow in his brow that indicated he was thinking deeply about something. Adrian glanced at the children, who were more interested in seeing who could make the loudest slurping sounds with their soup than in adult conversation. "I had an interesting visitor at the workshop this morning. A gentleman from the capital, very well dressed, very formal. He said he'd heard about my work and wanted to commission a special piece." Elena felt a strange flutter in her chest at the mention of the capital. She couldn't say why, but something about that word always made her feel unsettled, though she had never been there as far as she knew. "What kind of piece?" she asked, trying to ignore the odd feeling. "That's just it." He was very vague about the details. He said it was for a restoration project, something to do with historical preservation. He offered to pay more than I usually charge for an entire dining set, just for one piece of furniture. "That does seem strange," Elena agreed. "Did he say anything else?" Adrian hesitated, clearly struggling with whether to share something. Finally, he said, "He asked about you. About us, actually. He seemed to know that we'd been married 5 years, that we had children, even details about the bakery. When I asked how he knew so much about us, he said word of our craftsmanship had spread further than we realized." Elena felt that strange fluttering sensation intensify. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing that isn't common knowledge around here," Adrian assured her. "But something about him made me uncomfortable. There was something in his eyes, like he knew things he wasn't saying." Rose chose that moment to knock over her cup of milk, creating a distraction that ended their conversation as they dealt with the spill and Thomas's delighted attempts to splash in the puddle. But Elena found herself thinking about the mysterious visitor throughout the afternoon as she worked on a wedding cake for the miller's daughter. That evening, after the children were in bed and she and Adrian sat together in their small parlor, him working on carving details for a jewelry box, her mending one of Thomas's shirts that had encountered a particularly aggressive rosebush, Elena brought up the subject again. "Adrian, about that man today, did he leave his name? Any way to contact him?" Adrian looked up from his carving, his expression troubled. "He said his name was Lord William, and that he would return in a few days for my answer about the commission. Elena, I've been thinking about it all afternoon, and I don't think I want to take the job. There was something about him that didn't feel right." Elena nodded, relieved. "I trust your instincts completely. If something felt wrong, then we should listen to that feeling." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the gentle scraping of Adrian's carving knife. Elena found herself studying her husband's face in the firelight, marveling as she often did at how perfectly suited they were to each other. Even after 5 years, she sometimes felt amazed that this good, kind, talented man had chosen her. "Elena," Adrian said suddenly, setting down his work, "can I ask you something that might sound strange?" "Of course. Do you ever feel like you're forgetting something important? Something that happened before we came to Millhaven?" Elena's hands stilled on her mending. "Yes," she said quietly. "Yes, I do. Especially lately. It's like there's something hovering just at the edge of my memory, but every time I try to focus on it, it slips away." Adrian moved to sit beside her on the small sofa he had built for their first anniversary. "I've been having dreams," he admitted. "Strange dreams about places I've never seen, about wearing clothes I've never owned. In the dreams, you're there, but you're wearing a beautiful dress, and there are people bowing to you." Elena's heart began to race. "I've had similar dreams. About dancing in a grand ballroom, about making decisions that seem to affect hundreds of people. In my dreams, I'm important somehow, but not because I bake good bread." They looked at each other in the firelight, both struggling with the unsettling feeling that they were discussing something significant, something that might change their comfortable life if they pursued it too far. "Maybe they're just dreams," Elena said finally. "Maybe our minds create fantasies to make up for the memories we lost." "Maybe," Adrian agreed, but his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. 3 days later, as promised, Lord William returned to Adrian's workshop. Elena was in the back garden hanging laundry when she heard voices from the workshop, and Something about the formal, cultured tones of their visitor made her stop what she was doing to listen. "I trust you've considered my offer, Master Adrian," the visitor was saying. "I have," Adrian replied, his voice carefully polite. "And I'm afraid I'll have to decline. I'm quite busy with local commissions at the moment." "That's unfortunate. The piece I need is quite specific, a throne, actually, for a historical restoration. It would need to be carved from oak, with very particular decorative elements. The original has been damaged and needs to be recreated exactly." Elena felt her blood run cold. Something about the word throne sent a shock of recognition through her, though she couldn't understand why. "I'm sorry," Adrian said firmly. "As I said, I'm not available for such a project. Perhaps your lovely wife might convince you otherwise. I understand she is quite a head for business. May I speak with her?" Elena quickly moved away from the window, her heart pounding. She didn't want to speak with this man, didn't want him in her home or near her children. Everything about this situation felt wrong, dangerous in a way she couldn't explain. A few minutes later, Adrian came into the house, his expression grim. "He's gone," he said immediately, seeing Elena's anxious face. "I told him you weren't available and that our decision was final." "But, Elena, he knew things about us that he shouldn't know. He knew Rose's name, knew that you're famous for your cinnamon rolls, knew details about our life here." "What did he want, really?" Elena asked, sinking into a chair by the kitchen table. "I think," Adrian said slowly, "he wanted to see us. To confirm something about us." The throne commission felt like an excuse to make contact. Elena's hand went automatically to the silver rose pendant at her throat. As her fingers closed around it, she had the strangest sensation, a brief flash of memory, or perhaps imagination, of wearing much grander jewelry, of the weight of something important on her head. "Adrian," she said suddenly, "I think we should leave Millhaven." Her husband stared at her in surprise. "Leave? Elena, this is our home. Our business, our friends, our entire life is here." "I know," Elena said, struggling to explain the urgency she felt. "But that man, whoever he really is, he's going to come back. And next time, he might not be alone. Something about this situation feels dangerous, and I won't risk our children's safety." Adrian sat down across from her, taking her hands in his. "Where would we go? Everything we've built is here. There are other towns, other places where we could start over. You're skilled enough to build a business anywhere, and people always need bakers. We could pack up and leave before he returns." "Elena, you're talking about abandoning everything we've worked for based on a feeling." "Yes," Elena said firmly. "I am. Because sometimes feelings are the only warning we get before something terrible happens." Adrian was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. Finally, he nodded slowly. "If you truly believe we're in danger, then we'll go. I trust your instincts, and I won't risk anything happening to you or the children." That night, as they quietly began packing their most essential belongings, Elena felt a profound sadness at leaving the life they had built. Yet underneath the sadness was a sense of relief, as if by leaving they were avoiding something far worse than the loss of their comfortable routine. "Mama, why are we packing?" Rose asked, finding Elena carefully wrapping her best mixing bowls in cloth. "We're going on an adventure," Elena explained, forcing cheerfulness into her voice. "We're going to find a new town where Papa can build furniture and Mama can bake bread." "But what about my flowers?" Rose asked, her lower lip trembling. Elena knelt down to her daughter's level, her heart aching at the confusion and fear in the little girl's eyes. "Flowers can grow anywhere, sweetheart. And we'll plant new ones, even prettier ones, in our next garden." As she held her daughter close, Elena caught sight of her reflection in the window, and, for just a moment, she could have sworn she saw someone else looking back. A woman in elegant clothes, wearing a crown, holding a child who might one day have been a princess. But, when she blinked, there was only Elena Fletcher, a baker's wife comforting her frightened daughter. By dawn, they were gone from Millhaven, their wagon loaded with tools, belongings, and hopes for a new beginning. Elena looked back once at the cottage that had been their haven, at the garden where her children had played, at the bakery where she had found such joy in her work. "No regrets," Adrian said softly, following her gaze. "No regrets," Elena agreed, though her voice caught slightly. "We're together, and that's what matters." As their wagon rolled away from the only life they could remember, neither Elena nor Adrian noticed the figure watching from the hills above the town. Lord William stood motionless until they disappeared from view, then slowly mounted his horse and rode toward the capital, his mission complete. The royal family was alive, healthy, and still in love. The question now was whether they would remain safely hidden, or whether the growing magical disturbances around the sleeping palace would eventually call them home to face a destiny they no longer remembered. 7 years had passed since Elena and Adrian Fletcher fled Millhaven, and they had found peace at last in the remote mountain village of Silverbrook. Nestled in a valley surrounded by ancient forests and crystal-clear streams, the village was so far from the main roads that travelers rarely found it by accident. For the Fletcher family, this isolation had been a blessing, allowing them to rebuild their lives without fear of unwanted visitors asking uncomfortable questions. Elena stood in her new bakery, larger and more successful than the one she'd left behind, putting the finishing touches on a batch of her famous honey cakes. Through the window, she could see Adrian in his workshop across the village square, teaching their 11-year-old daughter Rose the finer points of wood carving. Their 9-year-old son Thomas was helping, though his attention span for detailed work was still developing. At 6 years old, their youngest daughter Lily was content to play with the wood shavings, building elaborate fairy houses under Adrian's patient supervision. Life in Silverbrook had been everything Elena had hoped for when they'd made their desperate escape from Millhaven. The villagers had welcomed the skilled baker and carpenter with open arms, and, over the years, the Fletchers had become integral members of the small community. Elena's bakery was the heart of village social life, while Adrian's furniture was treasured by families throughout the region. Yet lately, Elena had been experiencing disturbing dreams that left her restless and anxious. In these dreams, she walked through vast corridors lit by crystal chandeliers, wore gowns of silk and velvet, and made decisions that seemed to affect the lives of thousands. Most disturbing of all were the dreams where she stood beside Adrian, but he wore a crown, and people bowed when he spoke. This morning had been particularly difficult. Elena had awakened from a vivid dream in which she had been saying goodbye to someone important, someone whose face she couldn't quite remember but whose absence filled her with overwhelming grief. The sadness had lingered throughout the morning, making it hard to concentrate on her baking. "Mama, you're singing the sad song again," Lily observed, appearing at Elena's elbow with her usual gift for startling people. Elena looked down at her youngest daughter, surprised. "I wasn't aware I was singing at all, sweetheart. It's the song you sing when you're thinking about the places we used to live," Lily explained matter-of-factly. "Rose says it means you miss something, but you don't remember what it is." Out of the mouths of babes, Elena thought. Her children had grown up knowing that their parents couldn't remember their early lives, and they'd accepted this as simply another peculiarity of their family. But Lily, with the perceptiveness that sometimes seemed supernatural in children, had apparently noticed patterns that Elena herself hadn't been aware of. "Do you think we'll ever remember?" Lily asked, her 6-year-old face serious. Elena knelt down to her daughter's level, smoothing the child's honey-colored hair. "I don't know, sweetheart. Sometimes I think forgetting might be a blessing. If we can't remember something, maybe it's because it was too painful to hold on to. But what if it was something wonderful?" Lily persisted. "What if we forgot something beautiful by accident?" The question haunted Elena throughout the day. What if indeed? What if their lost memories contained not trauma to be avoided, but joy to be reclaimed? That evening,